Perfect. Welcome to another episode of Epic Markets Podcast. There's a lot of stuff happening this week, the last couple of weeks. DeepSeek, the US tariffs and whatnot. There's so much stuff to look forward to and to discuss. Welcome, Moise. And we can kind of get this episode going by just getting a general recap of the market for the last week and how the markets did. And obviously that will lead us to a good segue into, our topics for today.
Okay, sounds good. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so I think that it's actually important to just reflect upon this last week because there is a new contender on the market when it comes to AI, and that is DeepSeek, as mentioned obviously in the title of this video and in the intro that James, you've provided. I think it's important to note that DeepSeek has, upon its launch and the buzz around it, it's wiped out quite a significant amount of value from the stock market. I have in my notes here close to $600 billion in value. NVIDIA specifically has taken over close to 20% hit. I think 17% to be exact. But it just goes to show that the AI race is it's on, it's hotter than ever, and it's great to have this type of healthy competition because premium users of ChatGPT, they're revoking their memberships and going over to subscriptions and going over to DeepSeek. Then there's questions around, well, how good is DeepSeek? It's great, but how good is it with being unbiased? And then the question is, how biased was ChatGPT? How can we get around this? So the AI space is actually really interesting. And before I actually go through some of the market, actually, James, I wanted to ask you, there's another one called Perplexity. I've just started recently using that. Are you familiar with that one as well?
I've heard of it, but never used it. And in fact, I haven't even used DeepSeek as much. I've seen videos and reels of it floating around, just questioning its censorship stuff. But yeah, I mean, apart from ChatGPT, which I've used quite extensively, I've not used any other AI model as such.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think DeepSeek is really interesting because it's like a freemium version of ChatGPT with access to its premium tools and type of thinking. But then there's Perplexity, which I recently came across, and it's like an AI advanced version of Google search. So if you want creativity and you want help with writing and summarizing, you go for ChatGPT and DeepSeek now. But when it comes to factual searches and sources and more accurate data, there's another one on the market called Perplexity, which is I'm finding really interesting because after playing with DeepSeek, I'm like, what else is out there, and what is going to consistently test these existing players? So aside from the obvious news that DeepSeek came onto the market, it claims to be much more cost effective, and it has taken the stock market by storm. I think that it's important to note that I see the market, the general market, the S&P 500, the FTSE, the tech sector, NASDAQ, as still an opportunity for me to still look for long-term entries, but the short-term volatility will still exist. And to highlight this, if we look at the chart here for NVIDIA, and this is the daily chart, around here, which is specifically the 24th of January, 2025, we have this really bearish candle. I was looking at this specifically for the long term to make an all-time high, a new all-time high. At the same time, I was hoping to see if there was an opportunity because it had gapped up. When you have a red candle like this, that means the candle opened here but closed here. But because it opened here, I was interested to see if NVIDIA is going to make a move higher towards the upside. But showing that this daily candle was bearish, it was clear to me that there is negative, or there's seller sentiment. The buyers are not in control as much as I thought it would be. And then the news of, I guess, DeepSeek came out, and the rest is history right here. So when we see this type of short-term volatility, given that NVIDIA is such a valuable company, it's larger than the most GDPs of a lot of countries. It's incredibly prolific in the technology it's putting out. It has Jensen Huang, who's been there for a long time, right? I think Meta and NVIDIA are one of the only two companies that I look at on a daily basis where their founders are still a part of the company. But when you see this sort of bearish price action and a gap down, and a significant gap down, you better be sure that this is going to affect the entire market, which it eventually did, right? So opening up around under 128, from a technical standpoint, you're under these levels of support. There's nothing but bearish price action that you can expect, especially with such a surprise move followed by a red candle. So that's how NVIDIA reacted. There was a lot of questions, I guess, surrounding how the technology would fare in the long term if there isn't going to be potentially such a high demand for it. Or are the claims made by DeepSeek true, and is it as efficient as it claims it to be, or did it actually have access to a lot of the NVIDIA chips that need to be acquired, whether legally or illegally, to be able to train its models? And also around, if DeepSeek claims that, or critics claim that it utilized a way to leverage the ChatGPT responses and data to then train its models further, are we going to start seeing more of this? So I think there's healthy competition. I found that Trump's comments on it were really quite a surprise too, because he was, I'm not going to quote it exactly, but he was saying that it's good because it tests the US market's capabilities as a hub for AI technology. But overall, NVIDIA did not fare so well. And ever since then, buyers and sellers are not sure where it's going to go. I also would like to highlight that it's holding this 120 to 122 level. And that purple line here is a 200 simple moving average. In past episodes, I've indicated that this is what the institution looks out for. And it's a little bit confusing. Is it going to hold a 200? Is it going to go further down? We're just going to have to see what this next week's price action is. And if you're looking at the highs and lows of this area, you want to see whether price is going to break towards the upside or whether it's going to break towards the downside. And that'll be a good first early indicator of how I would see NVIDIA fare for the next probably 2 to 3 quarters. Is it going to make a higher move, or is it going to start to rest and start to show more bearish price action? And how the market reacted, we can look at the S&P, and we can also look at QQQ, because NVIDIA has quite a significant share of the QQQ, I think larger than the S&P, but we'll start with the S&P because it is the general market that I look at. Here was my initial take on this was, okay, the family members I have, the friends that I have, they might be wondering, okay, is the stock market going to go down further? It's been quite a scary move. Is it time to sell, etc.? These type of questions, fears kick in, right? So, but I like to highlight here actually that, look, the stock market actually did okay. Even though this is a red candle, it started to make a slow move up. It's still holding the 50 and the 200 exponential moving average. So I would not be surprised if we still try to break the all-time highs. So how I see the market is, I'm still holding if I've entered earlier. I'm still looking at finding new opportunities in the near future to add to my portfolio if I was still looking to add. And at the same time, the market seems to be okay because it's still diversified. And that actually goes into another comment, that this whole tech sector correction, it just goes to show that having a little bit of diversification is actually really important. You don't want all your eggs in one basket, but because you're buying the general market, if you're investing in VTI or VT, if I'm investing in S&P 500 or QQQ, it is still quite diversified, although NVIDIA holds a significant share. And we'll just go through QQQ as well, because this highlights, I think QQQ is actually more responsive to the volatility showcased by NVIDIA. Let me just remove these levels here. What I had highlighted there were just support and resistance levels, areas where I'm looking for the upside, all-time highs, and the lows. So anytime significant price action is broken, like 500, for example, it's broken, I do expect bearish sentiment going into the 200 moving average. From a technical standpoint, like I'm seeing still sellers, but again, after that gap down, which is I think close to 1%, 2% gap down, don't quote me on it, I can just check. So it's around right here, market gap down to right about here. Well, that was about 3.5%. That doesn't happen every day. So the market took a big hit on the news of DeepSeek, but again, it's recovered. So I think everything's going to be okay. We don't have to panic. It's good to be diversified. I would also think about the fact that if you're very heavy on AI, I would reevaluate that maybe a little bit, diversify a little bit. Look at other stocks that you find are showing strength in other technology as well besides AI, because if what DeepSeek is claiming is true, that they've created and tested their AI at a much more cost-effective pace, then I would not be surprised if there's other competitors out there that would emerge. And I believe Alibaba has their own AI. I wonder how Amazon's AI would play into this. Meta AI is all integrated. So if you're heavily on AI, and if I'm heavily on AI, I would consider that as a very important play, but also maybe I should sort of diversify. I still feel very strong about NVIDIA. I still think it's a really great company, and they'll figure their way out. They've been challenged before with many other things. And it's not just AI that they supply towards, right? So healthy competition, good policies for American technology companies, hopefully underway under this Trump administration. And overall, short-term volatility is always expected in the tech sector, in specific plays, in specific industries, but the market's still okay. And if you're still hesitant about the market, you can zoom out and look at the weekly. And if you notice the weekly here, it's just a strong uptrend that we can still see. And it's not looking like it wants to come down anytime soon. This weekly candle from the previous week just goes to show that there are buyers and there's not as much sellers. So you can also see here, there's more green candles than there are red. And every time a red candle comes in, buyers step up. They're like, no, we're in control. We're in control. We're in control. So that's a good sign. And in a previous episode, I did mention that over a course of 100 years, the market presents close to 50 opportunities that are above 10 to 20%, about between 10 and 20%. And those are buying opportunities. And if you notice that there's a huge correction and there is a short-term bearish market, like we see here, these are just pullbacks on the weekly candle. And I see these as healthy pullbacks because the market does need to take a break from time to time. New buyers step up, new sellers come into the market, and then recovery occurs because the stock market is designed to make higher highs and higher lows. So overall, that's a summary of DeepSeek affecting AI, NVIDIA's large market share in QQQ and S&P 500. And at the same time, S&P 500 and QQQ are still performing fairly strong.
Yeah, I mean, so much to talk about. DeepSeek as a concept, I mean, obviously everybody knows about it. The R1 model is what a lot of people are talking about, and it actually rivals OpenAI's O1 model. But their kind of proposition is that it was created at a fraction of a cost and is almost as efficient, if not more, than the current large language models that we have on the market. It has gained credibility as well from a lot of important players in the space. So, for example, Microsoft included it in its library of Azure cloud infrastructure. So DeepSeek is a part of it now. So that kind of gives it the credibility that, okay, it's not just a fad. It's actually a strong large language model that can be used as an alternative to more expensive ones. It is kind of surprising to me, though, that a lot of the attention this past week has been only on Nvidia stocks, and a lot of people don't understand the relationship between like, oh, why is DeepSeek creating such huge problems for Nvidia, whereas Nvidia is not it's a chip player. It's not like a large language model player, although it has its own kind of hold on large language models. But a direct competitor would be like ChatGPT or an OpenAI, which is indirectly related to or directly related to Microsoft. And Microsoft, including it in its Azure cloud infrastructure, actually proves that it is a healthy competition between these two. There's nothing to be, as dramatic about it as people are making it out to be. The process that DeepSeek uses to kind of train its models has kind of received a lot of criticism. And although like a lot of this stuff is not released to the public and it's not public disclosures, so all we're relying on is like a 22-page research report that DeepSeek came out with and explaining how they've trained the model and giving very vague numbers, in my opinion, saying that okay, you've trained it under $5.6 million or something. And to kind of give you perspective, it's 100 millions for OpenAI's training and then 5.6 million for DeepSeek, which is obviously a huge jump. But is it as efficient? I mean, they do claim so, but there's so many problems that I see with it. First of all, obviously, there's no clear indication or kind of a breakdown of the $5.6 million. There's nothing to back that up. They haven't released it. So can't be really sure about that $5.6 million figure. How have they trained these models using with chips? Because US already had a kind of a trade agreement with China where it restricts the sale of high-end AI chips to China. It means that most likely, like I'm pretty sure these DeepSeek models have been trained on lower efficiency chips. While that being said, it could be you still be using Nvidia's lower efficiency chips because they are still the market leaders in AI chips. So the possibility of them using any other chip, I don't see that. I still see that. And there have been reports where they've, there are kind of reporters coming out saying that they have been using illegally or legally NVIDIA chips to kind of train their models. And DeepSeek actually uses a process called distillation. So whereas OpenAI actually uses open source information to train its models, and therefore it takes a long time and a lot of money to train those models because it needs access to all those open source information. Whereas DeepSeek uses distillation, wherein DeepSeek will use other more adept models to train itself, and therefore it is not as resource intensive as, let's say, training an OpenAI model or a Llama model or Anthropic for that matter. Like those models require a lot more infrastructure, a lot more resources. But in general, like because DeepSeek does not use that method, that's the reason why it's less less expensive. It also goes to show, I must give it to DeepSeek though, like Sam Altman said, the country or the world actually needs trillions of dollars to actually win the AI battle. Meta came out with their earnings like last quarter when they said they would spend more close to $75 billion in AI to train its models and create new ones. And there's companies coming out with like really decent, I would say, obviously it's not without its own flaws, but really decent large language models built for like 5% of the actual cost. So I must give it to them. Like it is a huge revolution in the AI space, but how much of it is like really revolutionary and less speculative is something that I still have my doubts about. And I see the market 17%, NVIDIA 17% drop as an overreaction to news that actually, should take some time for investors to process and, kind of dissipate into the markets. But I still feel that this is good news for the AI space. I don't feel there's any need for, obviously, diversification as a concept. You should follow it, but there's no need for investors to stay away from AI stocks just because of this news. Because of two main reasons. One, NVIDIA is going nowhere. It's not that DeepSeek is an alternative to NVIDIA. I don't see an alternative to NVIDIA across the market. Any player having the same efficiency for their chips. Now it depends. If you're asking DeepSeek, do you actually need so expensive Blackwell chips to train AI models? Maybe their answer would be no. But a lot of AI enthusiasts that I've watched their YouTube videos, all they're saying is DeepSeek isn't as efficient and isn't as adapted handling so many queries that OpenAI can do. So I think it's still early days, but it goes on to show that the AI revolution is here to stay. It means that the AI space is growing, is getting more efficient, and there's this economic term that I learned when I was at university called Givon's paradox. I don't know if you've heard of it. So Givon's paradox says the more efficiency that you attain with respect to any resource, the demand for that resource increases. So, for example, like the more EV chargers there are in the US, the more efficient any entity becomes in utilizing that resource. The demand for that resource, in this case, the demand for EV cars would increase. Similarly, in case of DeepSeek and AI in general, the more efficiency that DeepSeek can bring into the AI markets, it is good for the AI industry because that would lead to a lot more consumers getting into the AI space, a lot more end users getting into the AI space, which is obviously good news for the AI markets. DeepSeek is actually the most downloaded app on the App Store after ChatGPT. So I think it's all good news. I don't see this as a kind of a negative news for the AI sector or the stock market in general. Yes, of course, when any news comes that, oh, this product is better than the other product, that leads to some kind of market corrections. But overall, in the AI space, I think this is good news for them.
Just make sure you don't write anything about the Chinese Communist Party. You'll be very disappointed. It's all filtered.
And then that leads to the question of how much of it is filtered, like how much of ChatGPT is filtered, how much of it is biased, like towards which, is it like left leaning, right leaning, if it has its own views about certain controversial topics. So I did see a couple of videos on YouTube where people are actually talking about, what is your opinion on Tiananmen Square disaster? And then DeepSeek completely shuts off and says, oh, it's beyond my scope or something like that. I mean, would you really blame the developers, right? I mean, in China, the way the government has been kind of stomping down upon like any criticism of theirs, I'm not surprised that anything that comes out of China has a layer of censorship to it. Mm-hmm. Be it an AI model or be it any kind of news that filters through China, it has to be viewed through a lens of skepticism and criticism, which is a good thing. I mean, for something like an AI model that in the future the hopes are that it is widely used and recognized across the world, you don't want that AI model to be skewed towards one party's opinion or skewed towards the left or the right. But yeah, that's how it goes, right? I mean, how much of Chat GPT is censored? I haven't tried searching for controversial stuff on there, but I'm sure it has its own flaws. And after all, these are trained on open source information that, in one way or the other, is skewed towards some opinion. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I wasn't surprised.
Yeah, I believe that I go in with the mindset that, okay, there's going to be guardrails, right, for any of these technologies, especially when they are AI related. And I believe ChatGPT has its own set of guardrails and filters and things that it will not discuss, and it would be responsible for all individuals, or even how I approach it is you have to go into using this technology with the mindset that you have to still check the information, and it's important to cross-reference. And yeah, it's, as you mentioned, it's not a surprise. And I believe that I've seen videos, or actually I saw a post where there are Reddit jailbreakers of DeepSeek, and they figured out a way to get a response, but it's in secret code that you can interpret. They replaced the vowels with numbers, and they got the answer. So the answers are still living within the artificial intelligence, but they just don't want you to know. But at the same time, I've seen others use DeepSeek to talk about some of the concepts and topics that you would assume would be censored, but they ended up, the technology actually did discuss it. So I believe, in my opinion, that the world is much brighter than it was, 60 years ago, and you can't fool people too many times anymore. People have the internet. Instantly they get information on their social media. Yep. So I believe the founders and creators, and as well as the Chinese government, is well aware that, hey, look, if we decide to censor this and we expose it, we release it to the world and it's the top downloaded app, we have to talk about. We have to let them be able to get information, because then they might not use the app anymore. And I think that was a danger here for me. I was like, do I feel comfortable downloading this on my phone? How much information am I sharing? Mm-hmm. I know there's ways where you can launch it on a virtual machine and then it doesn't have information shared with the servers, but
but how many people are going to the length of
exactly.
Some don't even know what a virtual machine is.
Exactly.
Right? So
yeah.
That's one risk you're always running with, like using AI and using any app for that matter, like even Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp. All of them use your data in some way or the other. But with the scope that an AI model has, the possibilities are endless. That's the most scary part. And I wanted to touch upon one point I missed when I was speaking. Was the problem for NVIDIA now is to justify why there is a need for, I don't know the price of Blackwell, but $100 million chip for generating, for training these other large language models, whereas their H100 or like the old generation GPUs or CPUs are still, kind of powerful enough to train large language models. Now that's the question for NVIDIA, and it'll be very interesting to see what Jensen Huang's response to DeepSeek would be in the earnings call, and they come out with their earnings in Feb. So it is an interesting thing to look out for. But that being said, I feel like NVIDIA, along with a few other players like ASML and TSMC, are so integrated and so essential for the whole AI infrastructure that a 17% drop or like a 20% drop would be like a blip, maybe like 20 years from now. It is being talked about right now because it sounds revolutionary. How much of it is true is like a different question. But it sounds revolutionary, and anything that sounds revolutionary brings effects to the markets like this. A $600 billion erasal from the market is the biggest break for a company in US equities history. So it is not a small thing, but at the same time, like the fact that NVIDIA was back up the next day, and obviously it's not recovered, but fundamentally, it's on its way to uh, achieve those results in those estimates that it was set the last quarter. If it takes a hit, would the market still prefer Nvidia? I don't think so. I mean, there are other players as well. A lot of people mistake AI for like AI is different from chips, and chips is different from AI. A lot of people kind of mix all of it, and then they have their own opinions. But I feel that Nvidia is still the strongest player. If I'm invested, as I am invested in Nvidia, I would be looking to doubling down on it. But it is hard to justify the need for so expensive chips when your lesser expensive chips can still do the trick. So that's something that is interesting, and I'll be closely watching the Nvidia earnings call to kind of get an answer for that question. It's going to be a very interesting call.
Yeah. What's the date on it? You said February?
I think Feb 26th, but I might be wrong. So let me check.
Maybe they need it for the... Because I know ChatGPT or OpenAI has its own video AI.
Feb 26th.
Maybe they still need it.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm not wrong, DeepSeek also has an image creation thing that it's come out with. Not as adept as the ChatGPT version of it, but this is not a new thing though. Like DeepSeek has been in the market for like close to 2 years now. It has been kind of working on its existing models, improving them, and releasing it to the public. It is a reiterative process, as with all other AI models. Again, this is not a new thing. 2023 was, I believe, DeepSeek's founding year, and interestingly, this is founded by a hedge fund manager in China. So a lot of money being obviously put into it. That $5.6 million figure, I'm not sure how true that is. I would still wait for more information on that. If that gap is so drastic, like 5% of the actual expenditure on OpenAI's training, that's huge. But the fact is, right now, with the information that I have, I don't believe that number. So I would need more kind of more disclosures on it. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, yeah, Nvidia's earnings call is on Feb 26th, the end of this month. So between now and then, I do expect Nvidia to kind of at least gather some momentum going into the earnings season. And it's not been a good couple of weeks for Nvidia. A lot of negative news around Blackwell chips and it not being as efficient, and production issues and stuff like that. But and that is the reason. Couple that with the DeepSeek problem now that Jensen has to address, it is going to be a very interesting and very kind of a very pivotal quarter for Nvidia.
Okay.
But there's been so much more. Just to touch on a second topic, and before we end the podcast, the US tariffs. That's a huge, huge deal for everyone in the US, everyone in Canada, Mexico, China. So 25% tariffs on Canadian imports, 25% tariffs on Mexican imports, 10% tariffs on Chinese imports, on top of all the other trade restrictions that it already has with China. I mean, Trump's come in and he's decided to say to the world, yeah, I'm the king here. What I say goes. And I don't know how healthy that is for the markets. It will have an effect, obviously, on the Canadian economy. I've been reading up numbers, and just to quote a few numbers, I've written it down. Just to give an idea of how skewed the trade imbalance is, 17% of US exports is to Canada. So 17% of all things that US exports to the world is to Canada. But that number for Canada is 75%. So 75% of everything that's exported in Canada goes to the US. So any import tariffs on Canadian goods means that Canadian goods are going to be more expensive for US consumers. And therefore, the kind of natural reaction to that is to switch over from Canadian products over to some other alternative, which means nobody's going to buy Canadian goods anymore. I mean, the numbers would go down drastically for the US markets. And a very important point here is that oil and energy is not tariffed at 25%, it's tariffed at 10%. And that shows how conveniently Mr. Trump decided not to kind of do a 25% on energy. They know that the US can't, a lot of US states rely on Canadian energy to keep their factories running, to keep the electricity running in their homes. 30 United States states actually use Canadian electricity. So, and I've heard reports where Canadian mayors and governors and premiers are going like, "Oh, we will shut down electricity for these U.S. cities as a retaliatory, in retaliation to what Mr. Trump has proposed." So it's very interesting times. As of now, the markets, it did come in effect on Feb 1st. So we have not yet seen how the markets react to it. I would still say that there's been a very, very prolonged campaign for use Canadian or like switch to Canadian stuff here in Canada. So you would see a lot of ministers and a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of business owners actively advocating for like buying Canadian stuff over US products. In fact, in Ontario, the premier has said that they would remove all US produced spirits from liquor shops across Ontario. So that's going to be a big hit for the US markets. And overall, generally speaking, it's not going to be good for either the Canadian economy or the US economy. But because the trade imbalance is skewed so much in favor of the US, the Canadian economy stands to lose a lot more than the US economy. One more point that I want to kind of wrap this whole session with is it will also have an impact on the immigration restrictions that Trump has kind of aimed to achieve during the first few days. Is like, oh, I want to stop illegal immigration from Canada, illegal immigration from Mexico, and there's so much money being pumped into policies and tactics by governments on both sides. So the Canadian government pledged $1 billion, or I think 1 billion or 100 billion. I'm not remembering, but a very hefty amount of money to kind of restructuring their border security plans and hinting to the US government that it's going to do everything in its power. And even then, Trump went ahead with, the tariffs. So does tariffs help in curbing immigration problems? According to academic research, it won't, just because of the fact that, okay, once tariffs set in, that means, for example, Mexico's GDP is going to contract by around 4% is the estimate. So when the GDP contracts, when the currency devalues, a natural reaction to that is move from that country to the next best country. And in that case, move from Mexico to the US. So I do not see a logic in these tariffs being implemented from a curbing immigration problems perspective. But I see a lot of support for Canadians and the Canadian government from the US side as well, where people have been actively voicing their opinion and saying that, oh, this is not what we voted for, and this is because they see the kind of effects that it'll have on both sides of the border. So very difficult times for both the economies, but the Canadian economy in particular, and I feel that it'll have very strong effects on some of the players on both sides of the equity markets, so the US markets and the Canadian markets.
So the tariffs are to curb immigration? I thought it was Would you mind explaining that as well? Because I was looking at the news just before all these tariffs were announced, and he was like, Canada should become the 51st state or something. And then we said no,
Yeah.
right? But how does it impact immigration, as you were mentioning, though?
So it doesn't impact immigration directly, but a lot of Trump's political tactics have been as a way to threaten governments into doing stuff. So, for example, like when they tell the Mexican government that, oh, we will tax you a 25% on all your imports, it has a thought process behind it that says, oh, if you do not mend your ways and if you do not stop the illegal immigration into the US, or if you don't stop the drug flow into the US, we are going to tax you. And I only see this as a way for Trump to indicate that, oh, I don't want any more Mexican drugs flowing into Florida, for example. I don't want any Mexican illegal immigrants climbing up the wall and entering the U.S. economy. And this is all his words, not mine. But that's the threat, supposed threat that Trump is addressing. And obviously, there's been this thing that Trump thinks that there is a trade imbalance, like it is unfairly skewed towards other countries as compared to the US, wherein US pumps in a lot of money and supports these other governments, but in return, US gets peanuts. So as a way to indicate indicate the intent that US is no longer going to sit down and take it from them, there are these tariffs. But historically and academically, it's been proven that tariffs have such negative impact on these other indirectly related problems like immigration and illegal immigration. So it's not going to be as effective if he thinks it is. It's just that Canada's already come out with 25% retaliatory tariffs. Mexico's still thinking about it. China doesn't actually care because, I mean, it's been under tariffs for so long now that and in fact, China is not reliant on the US for imports or exports for that matter, whereas Canada is. So Canada stands to lose a lot. And it is an interesting time as well because the next Canadian Prime Minister has a lot to deal with, and their response to these tariffs in the long run is something that will be closely looked upon and analyzed. But for now, I feel there were a lot of talks about, oh, will Trump actually go through with it? Because there was a lot of back and forth with ministers from both countries meeting on a regular basis in Washington the last couple of weeks to kind of dissuade their US counterparts from actually going through with the tariffs. They understand that a 25% tariff is close to at least, I think the number was 2.6% of Canada's GDP. And if it contracts by that much, there's billions of dollars at stake. Unemployment will increase. And just to give you an example, some sectors are going to be affected more than others. So for example, the automobile industry is so integrated on both sides. The supply chain is so integrated on both sides. So for example, US steel goes from a US steel mill to a Canadian manufacturing plant. So it is taxed. Now, when the Canadian manufacturing plant produces these parts and ships it back to the US to a car assembly factory, it's taxed again. Now, when that car is finally assembled and then it is sold in the Canadian dealerships, it's taxed again. So that's already 3 rounds of 25% tariffs on each of the subproducts and byproducts of the car manufacturing process. And that would mean that the automobiles that are produced in Canada, either one way or the other, is going to be more expensive for Canadians and vice versa. So industries that are so strongly integrated, the supply chains on both sides are so strongly integrated, will stand to lose out a lot more. And some industries will be kind of insulated from the whole tariffs and shenanigan with respect to tariffs. For example, like the energy sector, it's only got a 10% tariff. Canada holds the reins in terms of energy and power. And that is something that the US needs in abundance because of them trying to find more energy efficient ways to further their AI programs, further their drone programs, further their defense programs. It's reliant on Canadian energy and Canadian power. So, and that is the reason why very smartly and very conveniently only a 10% tariff is imposed, whereas on all other products it's a blanket 25% tariff. So, I mean, both sides will lose. Canadians will lose a lot more, but all of it depends on the response of the government from either side. So the Canadian government and the Mexican government. There have been talks of a Canada-Mexico trade deal, exclusive Canada-Mexico trade deal, and also plans for Canada to start trade with the EU and start trade with the UK, for example. Like these are some very prominent players in the overall global trade and trade flow, and Canada should be looking to kind of diversify, its exports to other countries and not be as reliant on the US as much as possible. I mean, 75% of exports goes to the US. That in itself, it's a huge number. 75% is a huge number. And even if they try to kind of change that number from 75 to, let's say, 50 or 40, it's going to take a couple of decades. It's not like the industries are prepared for it. I don't expect this tariff to be like a set in stone kind of a policy. Trump, with like all his other policies, it doesn't last the entire term, or it doesn't kind of last. It doesn't play out in its full effect. So I don't expect this to be a set in stone policy, but that being said, it is imperative and it is very important for the Canadian government to kind of be very thoughtful, be very kind of careful about its trade policies going forward, and try to diversify as much from the US as possible. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Epic Markets Podcast. This is James Invests.
And this is Babar Trades World. We really appreciate you tuning in for another episode. If you found value in this video, make sure to hit subscribe.